Hello everyone. I want to make another drawing session here, but I'm gonna try and explain a little bit of what my process is, because there was a few questions. And also I'm gonna explain how to calculate the lighting, or how to better understand the lighting that you're looking at. But first let's start with just the figure and how to fit that figure on the page properly. Of course, keep in mind I'm not the greatest artist or anything like that, but you know, hopefully I can teach still something here and there. Okay, so how do we fit this on the page first of all, right? Like I would like to make sure that the drawing sits on the page and, you know, I don't somehow start drawing it and then my head is out of the page. There's actually a pretty easy way to do this, and that's just making sure that your first sort of half of the drawing is correctly proportioned. For example, we can see in this reference here that the rough midpoint, right, is the hips. And so we're going to try to put the hips also in the middle of our page. And we're also going to try and then draw the legs, that being the bottom half, so that it fits, which then will in turn lead us to have the top half also fitting, because we know that they're the same size. Another thing also that was asked in one of the comments was, how do you start, or which is the first lines that you draw, so to say. Now we know we want to draw something around the hips at this point, because we say, okay, we want to try and fit this as easily as possible on the page. And there is a very important curve here, which is this one in my opinion. I mean, it doesn't really matter. You can choose arbitrarily what kind of lines you would like to start from, but to me this, because first of all it tells you where the hip is, it gives you a good sense of the angles, and so let's start with that and let's try to get it roughly in the middle of the page. So this is the middle of the page, and let's just, without worrying too much, staying loose, drawing it down like so. Okay, we have our first line, right? And from this point onwards, it's just a matter of fitting the rest, using those lines also as a reference point, right? So I'm gonna try and draw the rest of the leg, something like so, and like so. And I'm going to try and figure out here the other side, right? The thickness of the torso is important. And another thing that is important here is the thickness of the leg. So maybe we can start from the thickness of the leg. We can see the underwear somewhere here. And don't worry about drawing sloppy lines. I think if you're just practicing stuff, it's also good to give yourself a break and just focus on the main shapes that you're drawing down and not really on the line quality. I also tried to draw just in pen for some of these studies, most of them, if not all of them, because that is usually a good way to practice for me and to sort of force me to recognize some of the mistakes that I make. And I'm sure there's going to be plenty of them. As you can see, there is already several here in the legs. They feel a bit strange in terms of proportions. Okay, we kind of got the legs down. We definitely did not make them wide enough, the hips. And we got the top of the torso a bit too wide. I think the main problem here is that line here, right? But it's okay. As we go on here constructing now, we need to figure out where the head is going to sit. Which is always a bit of a tricky part. But we can first of all see the arm. And the other arm. We have a lot of foreshortening here happening, so you have a nice and round shape. And Give his arm some depth to better understand what's happening. Shoulder. Can put the belly. Just trying to slowly block out some of those lines for the head. Okay, I actually made a mistake here. I didn't mean to go past the pure line art, but let's keep it here. Let me just finish out this foot here. Okay, so clearly not the greatest study of all time, right? But we can still improve upon this. We can try to capture the lighting. How do we do that? I think a good practice for me has always been to draw the lighting with a very sort of sharp transition. So I'm gonna, first of all, what lighting am I capturing here? What lighting am I drawing? Well, there is several light sources. There is actually two. We can see one light source, and we can tell, by the way, there is two from the base. You can see there is two shadows. That means there's two lights. The first light source is the main one, let's say, and it is coming somewhat from this direction. I'm going to try to draw it as clear as possible. Also forgive me, I'm drawing these arrows here with mouse. It's this one, right? And this light source is our main one. It casts this shadow here at the bottom, and it creates all of these shadows that are going to be appearing on the opposite side of the light source, of course, right? So wherever the light doesn't hit, we're gonna get shadow. And I'm gonna try here to show you how I sort of look at these shadows, and I try to like really outline them. Sometimes this is harder than other times because the transitions are not very clear. But the general idea is sort of this. And I'm trying here again, look at the reference and understand. The main transition points for those shadows should be somewhere along those lines, right? So I'm gonna try now and draw this on paper. Before I do so, let me also explain to you the second light source here. So this is what we call a rim light, and we can see it particularly here, right, in this sort of area where the shadow gets darker and then it gets brighter again. It's because of the rim light. Usually this is done to emphasize the form of things. It is a very good way to make something look a lot more 3D, especially if you're doing stuff like concept art, weapon designs, or whatever. But generally speaking, when we do figure drawing, it's a bit too much to try and capture all of that. So instead we just do one directional light, we just focus on that and we try to capture that and its shapes as well as we can. And that should already make our drawing feel a lot more 3D, and hopefully we can even fix a bit of the mistakes that we have here. For example, let's start by blocking out some of this lighting, right? You can see we have some around the belly button. And we're gonna do something like this. And here. Like this. And on the left side, I'm actually gonna widen a bit the hips, which is one of the biggest problems that I have with this. And I'm going to figure out this. Okay, I'm just now drawing the transition point, of course, of these shadows, looking at the reference and making sure that I sort of follow along. And what this will do, it will really quickly make your sort of very rough line art look a lot more believable and interesting. It's gonna hide a lot of the mistakes because those mistakes are gonna be less apparent because you now are adding form, and it's also gonna put your line art to the test in a sense, right? A good line art is gonna have an easier time with you adding, or you're gonna have an easier time adding those shadows. So let's just keep it pretty simple like this, and I'm just gonna hatch it in. I don't really wanna spend too much time here using a brush. This is a simple way to add shadows. Just hatch it all. As you can see now, the mistake that we had here, we widened the hip a bit, and it will be a lot less noticeable after we add the hatching. A little tip with the hatching is, of course, you want to try and stay as consistent as possible with your lines. And also, something that I think looks good usually is have the hatch lines go parallel to the directional light. This is a good way to, or a somewhat parallel, I don't know. It's a good way for you to get a nice transition, for example, in areas like this. You can tell, it kind of feels like the light is going that way, if that makes sense. You can also try and curve those lines a little bit to follow the form. I'm not going to overdo it now because I started doing them straight. And I think it's more important to try and stay consistent than anything else. Something like that. Okay, I'm not gonna overdo here this area because it's definitely going to end up ruining the whole drawing. There's a certain degree of simplicity right now to the figure that I don't want to add too much to it. It's really just going to destroy the whole thing. So it is good to learn also when to stop adding more detail. But of course, if you're just practicing, you know, experiment. You know, these are just doodles, these are just drawings we're doing for the sake of learning. And yeah, as you can see, we managed to fit the figure, not perfectly centered necessarily, but we managed to fit it properly. And we captured the lighting, we fixed a few mistakes. It is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, we did a good job here at capturing what we see. Let's try a maybe more complicated, perhaps, pose. Let's try something like this, perhaps. So this pose is a bit harder, right? Because first of all, it's foreshortened a lot more. The camera is much lower, right? We are the height of the feet, and we can look at these axes here and how they're tilted. The more you go up, that's you know, that tells you sort of the angle we're looking at this from. And yeah, let's try to again let's try to fit this on the page properly. We can see that this time the ratio between the bottom half of the body, let's say hips down, and the top is not the same, right? It's not 50-50 anymore. Because we're looking at this from the bottom, the legs appear much larger. So I'm gonna make the hips end somewhere here towards the top of the page. And I'm gonna just start with a very prominent line like this here, right? The bottom, the left leg is gonna give me a very good sense of scale, and it's a very simple line. It's very straight-ish, right? Slightly curved. And I'm gonna do bottom of the leg. I'm gonna then, you know, slowly try to figure out the rest and where that fits. Starting with the hand, which I'm gonna draw very simple. Something like this. And this. Okay. I think I did the butt cheek a bit too small here, right? So I might need to widen this a little bit, but let's see where this leads us. I'm a bit, what do I draw next here, right? It's a bit difficult sometimes to figure out how to continue. Well, let's think of the shoulder line. So we have a line somewhat like this. And the spine. We can see how tilted the pelvis is. And how much really the butt sticks out. You can see here, it's like literally a straight line here, right? It's kind of interesting. And we want to really capture that. And try to give it a nice form. Now, if you draw with pen directly, this is gonna force you to really like commit to specific lines and even maybe think of your hand movement before you put the line down. This is something that I think is very important to practice and can really help with confidence. And, you know, at the end of the day, I draw with a pen mainly because it's a bit more permanent. It feels a bit more of the right medium, right? You can also first sketch things out in pencil and then draw on top. Personally, I don't like it because you're basically drawing the same thing twice and that's a bit boring for me. And ultimately, pen reminds me and shows me my mistakes in a very permanent way that I can kind of learn from. Okay, so we're working our way down here. Let me just... I don't really know, this hand is cursed. What about this hand? Something like that. Okay. Tuck. Okay. Okay, so the heel ends below this. And the foot kind of folds in like that. If you're struggling to get the right proportions or scale of things, sometimes it's good to think of the reference, for example here, of like reference points. So here I looked at the heel, this point here, and where it lands compared to like the opposite side, and then I sort of tried to fit that. Of course, you know, it's not gonna be like perfect, but we're doing what we can. Here we have the legs separating. I made them separate a bit higher, as you can see. Already made that little mistake, but it's okay. And interesting here, the leg on the right, on our right side, so to say, is actually behind. The foot is behind the other foot, so it appears this foot here is bigger, right? And you can see here that it's actually further back. So that's an interesting thing to keep in mind here. It's going to be larger, it's going to fall lower than this foot here. Because of that exact reason. I definitely kind of screwed this up already. See if we can somehow save this leg. It's looking real weird. Yeah, it's definitely a strange pose for this foot. But I think we kind of got it. I think the heel is looking a bit weird. But, you know, we kind of captured this. Now we're going to do the same thing we did before. So, trying to, first of all, spot any major mistakes and add the lighting on top and hopefully fix a few or camouflage a few of those mistakes by adding the lighting. I mean, one major thing that is different here is this arm. I didn't pay attention to how distant it is from the cheek, and it's obviously a lot more distant than is in the reference. Not the end of the world, not a big problem, so I'm not gonna worry about that. Then we have the back. I mean, again, I can see here that this is a bit thinner, so I rotated a bit more the torso. Not a big mistake, nothing major that is too noticeable, so again, I'm gonna ignore that. I'm gonna just focus on blocking out these main shadow parts, following the reference. So here is an interesting moment now, because as you can see, it is not very clear how this shadow is following the form. And that's because this shadow is very smooth and sort of, it's hard to figure out where the line is, right? Is the line here? I can see that there is some sort of darker part here and here. So how do I choose, you know, how to abstract this line? I think this is something that comes both with experience and with understanding anatomy better. The better you understand the anatomy, the better you can understand what muscles are underneath here. I am going to follow a bit this sort of crevice here that there is. It's very subtle, but I think it adds a lot of form, and it helps a lot. I'm not gonna do super dark shadow on the cheek here, and so I'm gonna try something like I just drew it there. So I'm gonna go down and a bit inwards, and then I'm gonna go straight down for the knee, and I'm gonna add a bit of shadow here too. Now on the left, I can see, first of all, I can definitely push this cheek a bit more. I'm gonna do it, and I'm gonna add my shadows like so. Here again, this feels like it's in shadow, but it is a bit tricky, right? To draw that part in shadow because it's so thin, and it's probably going to end up ruining the study like that I'm drawing, because I did it pretty small and I don't have a lot of space here to draw that. So I'm not gonna draw that right side shadow, which is mainly given from the curvature of the leg, and instead I'm just gonna choose to ignore that and focus on the left side here and the shadows that appear there. Here, if you know how this muscle works for the lower leg, you're gonna know that there is a little bit of, you can see that this part is a bit darker, so I'm gonna try and capture this muscle by doing a little zigzag line like that. And this is kind of what we end up with. For the left leg, it's a lot simpler. Just go down basically from the back of the knee straight to the foot. Like so. And now in the top half, we are basically done already. Just need a little bit of lighting maybe on the hair. Hair is very difficult when you draw with this style because it is not as apparent. I mean, as you can see from this reference, it's not as apparent where the transitional points are of these shadows. I usually just try to really like think a bit of a simplified version of what I already have in place and just sort of like make it up. So if I imagine this hair as a single mass, how would the light hit it? Of course, hair is very complex, so it's not very easy for you to, you know, make out all the different shapes and strands of hair, especially if you're doing quick poses. So I would just focus really on those like main shapes here that we can see. Excuse me, I have a bit of a cold, so my throat. And I'm gonna just hatch it in now. Another tip when you hatch is to follow the form. So right now I could have hatched it all the way to down here, but instead I just hatched the arm, and then I'm gonna hatch the other part. And what this does, it separates a bit better, those parts. I'll try and hatch this real quick. And there we go. We added our lighting. And our figure is now popping a lot more. And yeah. So that's the main gist of it. I'm gonna do a couple more studies on this other page, and I might not go as in-depth, as I already explained the main things here. And yeah, you can draw along. By the way, in case you're wondering, what I use here is a software called PureRef. You can basically drag and drop images in here, and it's very good for sort of references and stuff like that. Also, the link to the reference pack that I'm using is going to be in the description. You can buy that off of ArtStation. It has a lot of very fun and sort of playful poses, like these ones, for example, which I think are unusual and fun. So let's try and draw maybe... Yeah, why not? Let's try something like this. So, definitely a bit of a more challenging pose. Some parts of it are hidden. So a bit more overlap happening. Once again, when you start, keep in mind proportions so you can fit it all on the page. So make sure that your first line does not sort of extend too much. Starting from the arm here. Remember the angle here. It's important, like, to think of how this is like tilted, right? The shoulders. I'm just gonna like do a straight line for that. I'm not really gonna care. It's gonna help me with the rest of the construction. I think I drew a bit too many folds here. This is looking a little sloppy. Thing is, now that you have all these folds, I really need to follow them to make something that looks somewhat believable. And I'm really struggling to understand what the hell I just have put down already. So the knee. Very detailed foot. I didn't want to add another fold, but it feels like I have to. So I did it. Now I have the base here. How long does this leg go? We can try and figure it out by, for example, looking at the knee position. The angle feels like I did the angle a bit less tilted, so it should end a bit lower, to be honest. But yeah, somewhere like here in the middle of the page, of course, which is fine. It's always fun to have spreads where the drawings sort of go past. Oop. And you really have to sort of practice drawing in between the pages. It's definitely a bit challenging. Okay, so feels like I got the main part of the legs down. Let's move back to the top half of the figure. Some of the hair. I really struggle with the head when I draw in this style. Mainly the position of it. Let's see if I can try and not suck as much. Tuck, tuck, maybe something like so. Try to figure out here the hair. Okay. Something like that. Again, let's choose some arbitrary shadows here on the hair. Not worrying too much about capturing everything exactly when it comes to these minor details. You don't want to get stuck in like really copying too much the reference, especially when it comes to like, you know, these more smaller details, right? Because you run the risk really of getting a bit lost in the detail. Instead, you really need to keep an overview on the whole thing and not get too stuck in detailing certain parts. Otherwise, you run the risk really of ruining the pose. I'm gonna ignore this tiny little speckle of light on the second cheek. It's a bit difficult to draw that here without it looking weird, in my opinion. And that's mainly it already. Most of this is all shadow. I'm still gonna try and show a bit of the body structure here, despite the fact that it's all in shadow. And yeah, let's try to start hatching some of the stuff. I guess the pants, actually, I still need to figure out the lighting for, but let's first hatch in the arms. Our arbitrary hair shadows, let's put those out too. It's also usually good to keep your lines always going in the same direction. I think I chose a bit of a stupid direction. And the reason why it's a stupid direction is you want to make sure that your hatching lines are not too long, because the longer the lines are, the harder it is to make them consistent. So right now I run the risk of these being very long if I do them on the leg, for example here, but we will see what happens. I'm just gonna try and keep them consistent. So we have some shadow here, the leg. Okay, moving to the pants. As you can see from the reference, it is not super easy to understand here where the lighting is. So what we can try to do is we can try to think again, keeping in mind where our directional light is coming from, which is something like this. Again, this is our main shadow at the bottom there. Yeah, we can try and keep that in mind, and so you know, whenever we have a fold, like in this case here, on the left side of this fold there is going to be some shadow, for example, right? Same here. And I'm gonna also just make sure, I think it's because there is a very strong rim light that appears on the pants, and that makes it look like the whole pant is lit, but the reality of it, I think, is that the left side here would be in shadow if we didn't have that rim light. And I am just going to really sort of roughly block it out like that, and maybe add a little shadow here. Underneath the crotch here, this is going to be all fairly dark. Same for this. Okay. Let's hatch it in. See, this is what I mean. Now, if I were to follow this line, it would be a very long hatch line and it wouldn't look very good. But thankfully, I didn't do it in that direction. If the lines get too long, you can stop and continue them afterwards. Making sure that you keep the density the same should be fine. It will look slightly less consistent, but it should be okay. And there we go. I shouldn't have moved. I forgot. Okay. So we kind of captured the pose and the lighting. Okay-ish, I would say. Let's not forget about the bottom of the leg here. of the foot, sorry, which is gonna be in shadow. It's hard to tell what is happening here, to be honest, because the pants are a bit strange and because the rope is in the way. Yeah, maybe that's a bit better. Yeah, it feels like the lighting is a bit wrong, right? Like there should be some more shadow. Perhaps that's because we are kind of, this leg is kind of bent towards the lighting. And what that causes is for these shadows to sort of not blend in as easily. But as you can see, the more I add to this, the more weird it becomes. So I'm just gonna stop it there. Yeah. And let's try a last pose here. We're gonna call this one done. Of course, we could have drawn more if we wanted, but I don't want to overwork her now, and this is just a quick pose. So let's see if we can find something else that is interesting. Perhaps something like this. This seems fun. We have a different outfit. I hope this is still somewhat centered. Okay, yeah. Not a lot of space left. Should be okay. This pose is pretty thin, so we can still fit it here, hopefully. I'm gonna move the page a little bit more like this, just because it's more comfortable for me. Okay, so let's try, and once again, another small tip. When you're trying to fit things on the page, right? You really only need to do the hard work once, usually. For example, I have this pose here on the page, and if I draw a second pose now, I can kind of like use this first one to orient myself, right? So if the hips are going to be roughly in the same position, right? I mean, this new pose that I'm about to draw has a leg that is more extended, perhaps by a little bit, but I'm going to use this pose here as a main guideline. And I can see that the pose does not extend a lot on the right side, right? So like this sort of like is pretty flat, so to say. And so I can push this really close to the edge here of the paper, right? And I'm gonna start with this very stark butt line. And yeah, something like that. You can see how tilted the hips are once again. So we have on this side a very straight line, and on this side a very long and curved one. Okay. Of course the leg is not gonna fully fit. It's fine. We're just gonna draw the pose behind. You can also draw over the other pose. I used to do that a lot. It does end up looking a little messy at times though, just FYI. And if you want your page spread to look a little cleaner, then you can just draw behind what you have already drawn. So we have a foot. Perspective of this is a bit off, but that's okay. That's also why it's good to draw in pen, in my opinion. You really like... there's no way around it, right? Like, you make a mistake, you see it very clearly. For example, now that I look sort of... like, I stopped drawing for a second, I can also see my hips are very wrong. This cheek, my starting line was very bad, and that caused everything sort of to fall apart really quickly. But we can, again, try and fix it a bit. Especially later when we add the lighting. Here we would be the knee, right? And now we can draw the other foot sort of coming downwards. And we're like here. And we can see the foot ends above the knee. So I'm gonna try to get at least it right. Something like that. Something like so. Yeah, you see the issue here is I didn't squish this enough. Again, still trying to fix it. You have to be careful not to add too many lines at once if you're drawing with pen, so if you make a mistake and you try to fix it, you really cannot do magic. The height of the shoulder here is important. Is there any easy way to figure out here how high the shoulder is? Not really. Doesn't seem to me like there's any easy way. You can try first of all by putting down this line for the shirt, or for the bra rather, and then the bra ends with this kind of like piece of cloth, and there is some folds. I'm not gonna draw the texture, of course. You kind of have to choose a bit what you choose to draw and how you choose to represent it. So I'm gonna do something like that. And there we go. So the arm, you can see how the sort of fabric bends very easily, like the direction in which it waves because of the texture it has, but yeah. Now the shoulder. The top hat is going to be pretty difficult to capture, to be honest. So I'm going to try not to... I'm going to try to block out the head very easily. And usually the issue with top hats or things like of this nature is that like the perspective needs to be really accurate in order to sort of get the look right. Glasses, not the best glasses. And yeah, we'll see. I will just sort of YOLO the hat. See what comes out of it. Thickness. And somewhere like here. And very little of the top of it is visible. There we go. So Let's look at the lighting once again. So we're trying here to improve maybe some of the shape language on the cheeks. And let's start first of all with the leg. It's very simple. You can see here there is this kind of area where the lighting is sort of fading a bit into the leg. That's because of the muscles of the leg. You have a sort of muscle here. And so we can try to abstract that. If we were to represent it with a single line, something like this would maybe make sense. And then here it's pretty straightforward. This area, we're kind of lucky because most of it is going to be sort of hidden by the hatching. So maybe some of those mistakes are not going to be as apparent. And here, once again, we can see that it's pretty hard to figure out where the line is. Because there is this part that is kind of like feels softer. And you can see the core shadow here. And then somehow you get more shadow here. So what I usually do is like a sort of like a zigzag. Something like that. To try and symbolize, like to try and show that there is a sort of bigger mass here. But, you know, there is many ways. If you were... you can also just draw these two lines and sort of like fade this out if you have different mediums. If you're drawing, for example, the shadows with a brush pen or something like this, you can really try to more accurately capture the shapes. But I think as an exercise it is good to try and stick to very simple sort of shapes for the leg. And now that I think about it, we don't really have those shadows in the frame anyway. It looks like they're going to be hidden. But it's okay. It was just still worth explaining. Once again, find some of those arbitrary shadows on the hair. Sorry, should zoom out a bit more. The hat, again, very difficult. If we consider that the light is coming from a little bit from the front and right side, like so. And we can tell that because of the shadow here again, right? We can see that some parts of this hat are lit very clearly. Also, like, not just the rim, but also the inside. I think that's very weird and difficult to draw with one line now. But we're gonna try to do something sort of simplified like that. And the thing is, the top of the hat, which you can see here looks very dark, would actually be, I think, lit, according to this light source. But because the hat is black, it's hard to see, and because it's further back, the top, it's also hard to see. But I think it should be lit, so I'm not gonna hatch it in. This textured part here is also gonna be a bit tricky. I'm not sure what the best way for me to now represent it is. I'm gonna try to just figure out what the anatomy underneath looks like. Here's the bra. Here's the other shoulder. And I'm just gonna ignore this piece of cloth here on the top. I'm just gonna hatch the rest in. Maybe something I can try, for example, is to not have the line for the shadow. underneath the piece of cloth. Maybe the shadows are going to be a bit softer and more hidden here. And so I'm just going to hatch it without the guidelines. Same here, so I can put the guideline there, but then it sort of gets covered. You can see that the consistency between the two drawings when it comes to the size of the hatching is not really there, and so that kind of makes it look a little bit more messy. The closer you get those hatching lines in terms of distance, the better and the more consistent the whole page is going to look, of course. And there we go. I think that... oh, we need the hat still. I don't know about the way that I did the shadow here, if it makes any sense, to be honest. It looks very wrong. It's a bit confusing, for sure. Also feel like more of this face should be in shadow. I'll try and fix it. Same goes for these hairs, for the hair, rather. Something like so. And I guess also over here. And that's it, mainly. Let's not forget actually our stick, which is somewhere here. And it's also lighted. And let's do one last little thing. Let's try to add the general, the main shadow that is being cast by the character. Just really hint at it. You can do this for all of them. I'm not gonna go back and relook at the references because, well, we can do that just to like try and understand a bit better. So you can see that most of them are gonna be sort of flat with the ground. And same goes for the other poses. One I think was this one. You can see here, because we are lower down with the camera, right? Oops, wait, it was this one here. Because we're lower with the camera, the angle of the shadow is going to be a bit different, right? So it's going to be pointing a bit more upwards. Definitely think I pointed it way too much upwards. And when it comes to the first pose, same thing. We have it slightly angled upwards. There you go. Without overdoing it here now. this is sort of what we ended up with. So yeah, I hope this was useful to a certain extent. We went over the general how to sort of fit the pose on the page roughly, how to capture the main shapes, how to start, how to fix maybe some of the mistakes you might get, and how to add the lighting. I think that's the more important part here, right? How to really add three-dimensionality to the pose and sort of build upon your initial sort of drawing. You don't want to just be drawing outlines the whole time. You don't really just want to be drawing sort of, you want to try and capture some of the lighting, some of the form, not just the shapes. I think that's an important distinction here. So I hope this is useful, and if you have any questions, let me know. The reference pack is going to be in the description if you're interested in purchasing it off ArtStation. The music is also going to be linked in the description, and yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.